Hi, and welcome to Jewish Insights. So if there's one thing that we have in common across all versions of Judaism, it's that we almost never talk about God. If you go into a Beit Midrash, a classical yeshiva, there's all this talk about law and Torah, but often God is not being discussed. And if you go somewhere on the other end of the spectrum, sometimes there's talk of politics or culture, but God really gets no name. Similarly, I'll often notice at like a simcha, a wedding, or a bar mitzvah, people will thank their parents, grandparents, friends. Sometimes they'll thank God, but God never gets an applause for some reason. I'm always the only person clapping for God. And then when we look at Purim, kind of the most modern story of the Jewish people in our history that's part of the Jewish canon, noticeably God's name is absent. There's no mention of God throughout the story, and it kind of implies that we are living in a world where God is less obvious, less visible, more hidden. So one of the questions we're thinking about right now is, where is God? Certainly since October 7th, where is God? But I think even before that, with the rise of the Enlightenment, science, and kind of a new way of thinking, and certainly the Holocaust, there's kind of been a move to talk less about God, and sometimes maybe to square God to the side. And so I'm trying to think about, how do we understand God today? How might we connect to God? What to make of God? The first person that came to mind is our guest today, Rabbi David Aaron. Rabbi Aaron is the dean and the founder of both Israelite and Oraita, both based in the Old City of Jerusalem. Israelite is an international organization educating people everywhere, and Oraita is a gap year program for people post-high school, pre-college for 1 or 2 years in the Old City. Rabbi Aaron is known really as the God expert, someone that people come to try to understand how to think about God and connect. And over the past 3 decades, he's written 8 books, many articles, videos, and talks. One of those books is one of my favorites here that I was reviewing recently, which is The Secret Life of God. I recommend it highly. And in almost all of his work, he draws from Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism. My first experience with Rabbi Aaron actually was at Manhattan Jewish Experience on the Upper West Side, I would say at least 15 years ago. I came to an event and he was the speaker there, and I think the thing that stuck out to me then the most was that there's no way to describe God, of course, it's impossible, but the way that Rabbi Aaron was able to use metaphor, humor, description as ways, kind of on-ramps to help you think about God. Not you hear it and then you're done, but it gives you a framework to think about God differently. And then the most amazing schut I had was when I first married my wife Tali. We were living in Jerusalem, and I had the amazing opportunity to walk to the Old City each day, to sit in Oraita, in Rabbi Aaron's yeshiva, and to learn in his seminar among all the other amazing rabbis who were there. So those are my first 2 experiences with Rabbi Aaron. Rabbi Aaron, I'm so thrilled that you're here today, and I want to say thank you and welcome.
Thank you. I really appreciate you inviting me on.
So before we talk about God, I'm going to do what everyone does. I'm going to push God to the side for a second, and I'm just going to ask you, I know that your yeshiva is in the Old City. I know you live in Yerushalayim, in Jerusalem, and what's going on there. I just want to check in. How are you? How's your community? How's your family? What's happening there?
Well, I have to say, for someone who's called a God expert, these are really rough times, because the obvious question is, where is God? And there's just so much pain. I personally know people who have lost their children in the war, and these are hard times, painful times, and times to really struggle, and a time to really face your faith. That's what's going on here.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, and I hear that very deeply. So let's rewind all the way back, and maybe we'll slowly build our way up to the present day. So let's just start with the history of your relationship with God. How did it start? How has it evolved? And how do you end up being the God expert?
Really great. It basically started one night when I woke up to my mother screaming, having a nightmare of the concentration camp. My mother was a survivor of the Holocaust. My mother never spoke about the Holocaust. She just screamed about it in the middle of the night. And that one night when I woke up to her screaming, I was young and I was bombarded with questions. Is there a God? And if there's a God, is he good? And if he's good, why is the world so bad? And if we're the chosen people, I wish he chose somebody else. And so that was the beginning. I was kind of cornered. All the books I wrote and are writing were not something I researched because I thought people had problems with God and I want to help them solve their problem with God. those books are me trying to solve my problem with God. And maybe that's why a lot of people resonate with what I say, because the questions I'm answering are my own questions, and the answers I'm offering are the answers that have helped me make peace with God. And so that's how I feel. I was just thrown into a situation. Very often, if you want to know what your life mission is, it's kind of like you've been handed a bag and look inside your bag and see what you were given. And let's say you're on a construction site, and in your bag there's nails and a hammer and a saw, so you're a carpenter. And next to you, the guy opens his bag, and there's wires and fuses and testers, so he knows he's an electrician. So when you look in your bag, you know what you came to this world to do. But there's something else in our bag that I think is very indicative of what we're here to do, and that's what's broken. And in my bag, there was a lot of wounded child stuff, a lot of brokenness relating to God and goodness, and struggling with suffering and tragedy and pain. And it was Carl Jung who said, only the wounded doctor can heal. And I would take that on and say, only the wounded rabbi can teach and hopefully heal. So
wow. So that's...
I'm trying to heal my own wounds, and in the process, trying to help everybody heal theirs too.
So what I hear you saying, which is interesting, there's a lot there, but one thing I hear you saying is that it wasn't the question of, is there or isn't there a God? It was the question of feeling a sense of conflict or disappointment or tension in your relationship with God, and then trying to find a way to, in your words, make peace in that relationship. Is that the correct characterization?
Not completely, because when God doesn't appear to be good, then you have good reasons to question whether there's a God at all.
Got it. Okay. And so then, your childhood memories, I remember my childhood memories, I remember being at the top of steps and saying, Hashem, I would call God Hashem, please let me get down these steps safely. And then at the bottom feeling like, thank you, Hashem, that I made it through those steps. I would say at that level today. I don't know if that's a higher level or a lower level than I am today, but I certainly think about the question of how our relationship with God evolves. I think it's similar to the Parsha. You have to come back to it every year. The relationship with God, you have to come back to every year. So how would you characterize, so you said a little bit of feeling, the questions you mentioned were things that were thrust upon you by yourself or by your family, that you felt these hard questions about God? What was going through your mind when you were young, when it came to God?
It was, I'm just one of those restless, seeking souls that's trying to make meaning and sense out of my life and out of this world. And, and whether there's a God or whether there isn't a God, bears a tremendous amount of influence on whether the world is meaningful and whether there's a purpose and whether I have a purpose, because I can't have a personal purpose in a purposeless world. And so my search for God has a lot to do with my search for myself. If there is a God, then who am I? And if there isn't a God, who am I? And so I think what we're all very, very curious to know about and very interested in is ourselves. And I think who we are is transformed by what we believe and who we stand before. Do we stand before a big bang, or do we stand before a good God?
Is that meant to be a rhetorical question?
Yes. Now.
So let's go with that for a little bit. Let's go with, and I think you're right that ultimately a lot of it is about looking inward. I would add to that, actually, in my experience, it's about looking inward, and also I feel like our models of God are often reflective of the people that we're around in our lives. So perhaps our parents,
sure.
The way we relate to our parents might be how we relate to God. But I think you're right that there's a sense of looking inward to try to understand God. So let's talk through that a little bit. I've heard you use kind of the framework of the me, myself, and I before. Talk to me a little bit about, looking inward. How does one find God by looking in?
Well, it reminds me of a story of my first time in Manhattan. I'm not from New York. I'm from Toronto, Canada. My first time in Manhattan was really overwhelming. Just this tall skyscrapers and the thousands of people and the hustle and the bustle. And I got to a street light, and the light turned red, and I was waiting to cross the street, but more people crowded around, and I just started to feel like nothing. And then the light turned green, and I just felt I was being carried by this stream of melting flesh. And I just lost my sense of self there. And suddenly I caught a glimpse of a flyer on a telephone pole that said, in someone's almost unreadable scrawl, "Come to the Coco Cafe and hear the greatest guitar player in the world." And I was really challenged by that. I mean, who is this guy who in the middle of feeling like nothing can say, "I am the greatest guitar player in the world"? And underneath that, he wrote, "Be there or be square." I mean, it's one thing for me to feel like a nothing in the middle of Manhattan, but to be a square nothing, that was a little too much for me.
Okay.
And I marvel over the fact that even though everything from without tells us we are no one and nothing, within us there is some kind of certainty that we are someone, that we really matter. There's a astrophysicist by the name of Eddington who said if we were to fill all of Grand Central Station with dust, one speck of dust would be this planet Earth relative to the cosmos. Now, on that piece of dust, speck of dust, is about 8 billion people. That means scientifically, mathematically, each and every one of us is much less than 1/8 billionth of a speck of dust. But that doesn't challenge anybody that's listening to this right now, because something inside me says, I matter. And that's where I start. What is this voice inside me that says I matter? And that certainty that I am someone. And essentially we are someone. We're some of the one, which is what I mean when I say God. God is the one that includes us all, that we are all facets of, and we are a someone. And so the soul, which is the real you, the I am, according to Kabbalah, is a ray of God, so to speak. If God were the sun, we'd be a ray of God, a ray of that sun. And that's who we are. We are souls. And deep inside us, we intuit that we are really significant. We might even think we're the center of the universe, and that's because we actually are a part of the center of the universe, which we call, or I call, God.
Okay, so, and I just want to get these terms right, so I understand that. The metaphor of the sun really lands nicely with me. What is a soul, let's say, and what's a soul compared to a body?
A soul is that sense of I amness, that pure awareness. You know, I'll give you an example. Let's say we were to close our eyes and we would just be aware of our physical sensations. And we would realize that I have physical sensations, but I'm not my physical sensations. I'm aware of it. I'm the observer. I would then go up the ladder of awareness and be aware of my emotions. I'm aware of feeling happy or sad. I have emotions, but I'm not my emotions. I'm observing them. I go up the ladder of awareness and I'm aware of my thoughts, and I have thoughts, but I'm not my thoughts. I'm aware of my thoughts. Then who am I? I'm that pure awareness, and that is the soul. And that pure awareness, you could say, is a wave in an ocean of universal awareness, which would be what we would call God.
And what is that? Does that awareness die with us? How does that work? Is it inside?
Awareness doesn't. Awareness, you, the person I'm talking about you before you got your name, Justin, before you got your body, before you got this job. You know, it's that you, that I am. Before I say I am David Aaron, before I say I am Rabbi David Aaron, there's a sense of an I amness, and that I amness is a ray of God. If you were the sun, that I am, this is a wave of God if he were the ocean. But the sense of self is rooted in and a facet of a greater self, which is what Kabbalah would call God.
God. And do you call that Tselem Elohim, being created in the image of God? Is that what you're describing, or that's something different?
Yes. You are a reflection of the divine. Yes, you are.
Got it. And so then, and I do want to ask that question. I'll come back to this. I want to ask what does happen in your opinion, or not in your opinion, in your learning. What happens when we die? Does our ray goes back to the sun and goes into a new body, or that ray dies out, or what happens when we die?
Okay, well, the truth is, the good news from the Jews is you, and I'm talking to you, the soul, you never die. You, as a soul, come in this world to play a character. You're playing Justin Pines. But imagine an actor has been given a role in a film, and he was very excited to get that part, and then he sees that in scene 8 he dies, and he said, "Well, I don't want to play this part because I'm going to die." No, the character is going to die, but you are the actor, and you're going to win an Oscar and go on and do another film, maybe, you know. So the you that I'm talking to before the Justin Pines part of it, which is the character you're playing, you never die. Okay, the character dies, but you don't die, and you will remember your character, but the character will die, but you don't die. The body dies, but you don't die, because you are part of the eternal. God. Even though you're not God, the ray of the sun is not the sun, but it is a ray of the sun.
And so this is, okay, so first of all, I love the metaphor of being a character in a movie. I'm playing the role of Justin Pines during my time on the planet of Justin Pines. So are you saying then the idea of like what's called a Gilgul, like a reincarnation, the idea is that, the soul of Justin comes back as a different character the next round? Is that the idea?
That's a possibility, yes, but it might not be. That's another talk if you want to go there, which is where you as a soul could possibly land after after this life. One of the options is that you'd come back and play another character.
Can I ask what are the other possibilities?
Well, the other possibility is you go to what's called Gan Eden, which is a state of consciousness which is quite ecstatic, and actually wait until you come back to this world in a period of time called the revival of the dead. And you come back to one of the characters, and according to some opinions, you come back to the character that did the most good in your life.
Got it. So in a series of time, like perhaps one comes back over and over again until they, let's say, get it right, or along the way, maybe one of the times they get it the most right, and then at some point they graduate to Gan Eden, and then in the time
and wait to the next step of history or the evolution of their consciousness and come back in the time of what's called the revival of the dead.
Got it. I'm going to keep going here because this is, again, these are the conversations I think we should be having, but we often are not having. What in your understanding and your background, how do we get to that time? How do we get to that time of the revival of the dead?
How do we get to that time?
Yeah, how does that time happen? Is that something that we earn? Is that something that God decides one day? Is that something that we have a chance to get, but if it goes wrong, we don't get it?
Well, the challenge of this conversation is some questions get an answer, and some questions get a class, and some questions get a course. You're asking those course questions, but we'll do the best we can with the time that we have.
Let's whet people's appetites, and if they want to learn more, they can look you up and read your books.
Essentially, we are part of what's called history, which is his story. It's the story about God. And that's what I talk about in my book, The Secret Life of God. And we are part of a story of an ever-evolving awareness of oneness. And that true reality is a oneness. And our sages and the Torah teaches us, Einod milvado, there's nothing but Hashem at all. There's nothing but Hashem. When you talk to an atheist and say, look, I don't really believe there's a God in existence, they're actually right. There is no God in existence. God is existence and infinitely more. And we're in existence. We're in God. We're a part of God. We're like a baby within the womb of her mother. A facet of the mother can't exist without the mother while in that womb state anyways. And basically the story of life is awakening to who we are as part of a greater self, which is what we would call God. And history is this evolving process whereby this truth of oneness is slowly being revealed more and more and more and more. And the truth is that this story is never ending. It's like love. love is a journey, not a destination. You can always love your spouse, your friends, your family more and more and more. And therefore, we're really part of a story of an ever-evolving manifestation or revelation or awakening to this total oneness, which emotionally will be experienced as pure love.
Wow. So over the course of history, we're getting closer to this like, I guess, global, universal understanding of the oneness, and that gets us to that time. So it's interesting for me. That raises also, when I think about Jewish history a little bit, I think about two eras. One, the time of, let's call it Mount Sinai, the temple, where you might imagine that God's oneness was much more easy to see, and then you transition to a Purim story where there's no mention of God. And similarly now, when you think of Judaism, before the Enlightenment, you might imagine a world where, thinking about God and imagining God's oneness was much more common, but actually it seems like we've taken a step in the other direction, where with the rise of science and the Enlightenment, God's oneness feels less obvious as ever. So are these kind of like dips?
Actually, I think we could go in a different direction.
Please.
The whole idea of the unified field is really, science is demonstrating more and more how the universe is so interfaced and harmonious, which itself is a manifestation of the truth that we all exist within and part of a oneness. So I think science is going to reveal God more and more, but as long as people think that God is someone somewhere over there, that's not the God of Judaism. God is not someone somewhere over there. God is the one. There's none but the one. We're someone. We're some of that one. And each and every one of us is actually a facet of, an aspect of. If God were white light, each of us would be a color in the spectrum of that white light. And where the direction we're going to is a greater and greater realization and manifestation of this truth, of this oneness, the interfacing of all of us. And that itself is the greatest pleasure, that feeling of connectivity, that feeling of we are one, that feeling of love that just flows from our hearts naturally. We will love each other with the same love we'll love ourselves. It says, love your neighbor as yourself, but most people don't quote the last words of that verse, I am God. But it didn't say I am God. It actually said I am, and the Hebrew word is yud, then hey, then vav, and hey, which really means I am all there ever was, is, and ever will be. There is only one I am. And that's why you can love your neighbor as yourself, because you and him are facets of this one great self, this one great I amness.
God, so you're raising a lot of things for me, but a question coming up from this for me now is, when I think of the scientists, I think of my friends who are into science, and they go back to your metaphor about the speck of dust in the beginning. They're like, Earth is the tiniest thing, and we are the tiniest thing within Earth, and like, how is it possible that we matter? And then I heard you say at the beginning this, and also humans are a speck in history, right? We have dinosaurs, and who knows how long humans will be here. And I hear you saying at the same time, there's some sort of inner sense. We feel in ourselves that we are important in some way. How do we know that's not just ego? Is there something, like, how do you get over that hump? Like, what's the thinking that allows you to say, this is not me just being egotistical and thinking that I'm the center of attention because my ego wants that, but actually there's something else more?
It doesn't really matter if it comes from ego. It is a deep sense that I somehow demand to feel that I matter. And it's rooted in a kind of given self-awareness. And ego is I matter and you don't. I'm self-contained. I'm independent. I'm self-sufficient. That's where ego comes in. Ego stands for editing God out. But the deep sense of self that I matter, when a person feels that I don't matter, what I say don't matter, that what I do doesn't matter, that totally undermines any sense of healthiness. And so it's a given. It's just a given that somehow we know that we matter. And we could say, well, but maybe we don't. And when we say that, we're so devastated by the maybe we don't, that almost proves even more that somehow deep inside, that just can't be the answer. Somehow we know we matter. And we're trying to really make sense out of our sense that we are demanding significance. And that's where God comes in, because if there is no God and this is all an accident, then really none of this matters at all. And somehow nobody wants to believe that. And so we're living in a strange way, hardwired in the belief in what some people call God. Some people don't like that word God. They might call it the universe, whatever word they use. There is a sense that and a desire to affirm that my existence means something. So, and that's rooted in an intuition of what we would call God, intuiting God.
And so sometimes that's actually the knock that people also will put on religion, which is that, you believe in religion, or you believe in God because you want to, sleep better at night. You're trying to come up with a narrative that helps you feel at ease, but you're just trying to make your life easier because you don't want to face reality. How do you respond when people kind of raise that way of thinking?
Look, I can't prove there's a God, and the atheist can't prove there isn't a God. But I can prove that the belief in God makes life a lot better and gives man a moral compass and gives the world hope of survival. So, in the end, I believe that faith is a choice, not a flip of a coin. I think there's good evidence that there is a God, but again, I don't think it's conclusive evidence. I think I wouldn't call it a leap of faith. I would call it a skip of choice, where I'm choosing to believe. And I think in the end, I think we all have to choose to believe what we believe. There's a woman that turned to me and she struggles between believing there is no God and believing there is a God. And she's a very, very challenged person. And I said to her, listen, Sarah, here are your choices. Tell me, you could either believe there is no God and the entire universe is an accident, it came from nowhere and it's going nowhere. When you think that thought, how does that make you feel? She says, that makes me feel hopeless. I said, okay. You could believe that there is a God and he created the world, but he decided to abandon it. He lost interest in it. So we're on a airplane that has no pilot. When you think that thought, how does that make you feel? She says, oh my gosh, that's very terrifying. I said, okay. You could think that there is a God and he hates your guts and he enjoys torturing you. When you think that thought, how does that make you feel? And she said, well, that just devastates me. I wouldn't be able to get out of bed in the morning. I said, oh, you could think that there is a God. We are created. There's a purpose. There's a plan. There's meaning behind all this madness. When you think that thought, how does that make you feel? She says, well, it gives me hope and it gives me the strength to get out of bed and do good. I said, okay, I haven't proved there's a God. I wasn't trying to prove there's a God. I was proving that believing in God works. I don't think there's anything wrong with choosing to believe in that which really works. Mm-hmm. And we'll all see when we finish our life here whether the choice we made about what we believe actually is the truth or not. But in the meantime, I think it's the best we have and the most reasonable, responsible choice to make.
Right. And I would add to what you said that actually, yes, on one hand, it might make it easier to get out of bed in the morning, but I think it also comes with a massive responsibility, right? If there's no God and there's no world, then, it's kind of like eat, drink, and be merry, and I don't need to worry about anyone else, and let's enjoy, or maybe there's some other intrinsic morality that pushes me. But I think this sense that you have, I guess I would use the word obligation, but some sort of relationship with God, there's I don't want to say baggage, but there's a mission that comes with that, a responsibility, right?
Absolutely. If a person lives with this deep sense that they have a calling, then they have to ask who's calling them and are they taking the call? And that's where I start. My belief in God starts with what I know about myself. I know I matter. I can't prove it. I don't need to prove it. I know what ice cream tastes like. I don't need to prove it. I can't explain why it tastes, why chocolate tastes like chocolate and vanilla tastes like vanilla. There's something that I know and that I'm sure about is that my life matters and your life matters. And therefore, to me, that's just the self-evident truth that God, there is a God, because I can't matter and you can't matter if this is all just one big bang. And so I do believe that we know God and that the truth of God is hardwired into our consciousness, actually hardwired into our self-esteem.
Okay, so now let's go down that path. I'm going to stop bothering you about whether there is or isn't a God. But I think I agree. I think there's an element of is there or isn't there. But now let's say we're on the train. I believe in God. talk me through like what that process looks like. What the awareness of God in the way you're describing, how does that play out? What are the questions we should be asking or thinking about in terms of how to live our lives with that awareness?
Okay, excellent. Let's say I'm having a conversation with someone and they tell me they don't believe in God. So I ask them, do you believe in good? Everybody I've ever asked that question says they do. I say, do you think that it would be in the best interest of the world that good would rule the world? Yes, of course. Are you willing to live your life in service of bringing more of that good into the world? Yes, I do. Guess what? That's functionally what Judaism calls believing in God. In fact, I believe that the word God is actually rooted in the word good, and that basically God is the personification of all good. And so if a person believes in good and lives in service of good, then that's the same thing as what this person calls God. You don't want to use that word? That's okay. The truth is I'm uncomfortable with the word God. I prefer the word Hashem, as you mentioned earlier on, and going back to the original consciousness of what the divine means in the terms of that word, that yud, that hey, that vav, that hey, which is referred to as the tetragrammaton. But for now, just to keep it simple, you ask a person, do you believe in love? Yes. Do you believe love is real? Yes. You think that love should rule the world? Absolutely. Are you willing to live your life in service of love and bring more love into the world? Yes, absolutely. Guess what? That's synonymous with what we call serving and believing and seeking to bring more God into your life. The only thing we know about God is the divine attributes. That's all we know about God. Those divine attributes is wisdom, compassion, kindness, justice, truth, peace. If a person believes in all those colors of the good, those are the spectrum of goodness. If a person believes in that spectrum of goodness and wants to serve to bring that into the world, bring peace into the world, and justice into the world, and kindness in the world, and truth into the world, and wisdom into the world, well, then that's what it means to serve God. Most people think serving God means placating some being up there in heaven who's got this control issue and seeks obedience and is hungry for praise. That's not in the deepest teachings of what Judaism is saying. What it means to serve God is synonymous with serving good. And Judaism claims that the good book, the Torah, is the guideline to a good life and to bring goodness into the world.
Right. It's interesting. And I guess some people could say, I want to serve good. I don't think Judaism has it right. I want to do it differently. That might be a way that they might find conflict there.
Well, that could be a very important conversation for sure.
Right.
That would be, but I think a lot of people's problem with the Bible is they've read it rather than learnt it. And I think that's what's unfair. Most people's reading of the Bible is in translation and things get lost in the translation. And quite frankly, in the Bible, God comes up a lot when I don't think the word God does justice of the original Hebrew word of what we've already discussed. It's referred to as the tetragrammaton.
So let's spend a couple minutes on that. What is the tetragrammaton and what can we learn from it?
So the name that has been unfortunately translated as God and then everybody gets triggered by that word God actually comes from the Hebrew word, and it's actually referred to as Shema Havaya, the Hebrew word Havaya. Havaya means existence or reality. And what it's basically telling us is that what do we mean when we say Hashem or God or that name? We believe in existence. As I mentioned before, the atheist is right. When an atheist says, I don't believe there is a God in existence, then I would agree with them. There isn't a God somewhere over there that's floating in existence. Rather, God isn't in existence. God is existence. And we always have to qualify that no matter what we say, God is going to be greater than anything we could comprehend and explain. So I will always say God is existence and infinitely more than that. And if God is existence, then I actually exist within him, and I'm actually a part of him. The word that Yud He Vav He is connected to the root being, lihiyot. And what that basically says is that God is the source of all being, or to be more correct, he is all of being, and I'm a being. Actually, there is a midrash where Moses asks God for his name, and God says, according to my deeds is my name. So because I'm teaching right now, I'm called a teacher. But if I saw someone singing, I'd call them a singer. And if I saw somebody dancing, I'd call them a dancer. The name, that Yud, that Hey, that Vav, that Hey, is telling us that God is being. That's what he's doing. He's being. And that's who we are. We are beings. We're actually verbs. If God were a singer, we'd be his singing. If God were a dancer, we'd be his dancing. And so really the name Yud Hey Vav Kei probably would be translated as the beer. If God is the source of all being, then he would be the beer. Now that sounds very interesting, but it's actually a word in the unabridged Oxford Dictionary, and it says the self-existent, the great I am. That's called God.
Say that again. Say that one more time.
The self-existent, the great I am.
That's the name for
right
God.
There in the Oxford Dictionary. Beer, B-E-E-R, which comes right after an intoxicating drink. And so, so really, I believe in the beer. I believe in the source of all being. I believe that I am a being, and he is the source. He is the beer. I am the singing. He is the singer. I exist within that field of existence, that oneness. And the name Yud Hey Vav Hey is identified with the attribute of Rachamim. Rachamim is unconditional love. The word Rachamim is associated with the Hebrew word Rechem, which means womb, which means that we exist within God like a baby exists within the womb of their mother. And just as the mother unconditionally loves that baby within her because that baby is a part of her, that mother loves that baby with the very love she loves herself because that baby is within her and a part of her. So too the name Yud Hey Vav Hey is associated with that kind of unconditional love. And therefore I believe in actually the New Age concept of the universe. People are more comfortable with talking about the universe rather than God. And people talk about praying to the universe or being loved by the universe or blessed by the universe. This New Age idea of substituting God with the universe comes much closer to what Judaism actually believes, even though we don't believe that God is the universe. We believe God is existence and the universe was within God. But nonetheless, what they're intuiting is they want a God who is not a being somewhere over there separate from us, but rather the universe supplies that intuition that I exist within the context of this divinity, within this context of this reality, and I'm a part of this reality. And that's why a lot of people are having a problem with God, because God is someone somewhere over there imposing his will on me. But if God is the very space and context of our being, the very source of our being, and we exist within him and we're a part of him, that to me makes a tremendous amount of sense to the sense that I have about who I am and what I'm really part of.
I'm digesting.
Yeah, I told you, these are more than question and answers. These are questions in course. Let's do it.
I'm learning, and I really appreciate you spending the time with us to discuss them. So I want to come back to the question around kind of the way, let's call it the character of God. I know that we've said that God is not outside of us, but the way the character of God evolves in Jewish history. So even
God is also outside of us, but also within us. But
right.
Okay.
I know we've touched on a few paradoxes that we haven't, and we'll get to those. So, in your mind, looking at, let's call it Tanakh, like the books of the Jewish canon, why is God presented as a very present character with a voice that's talking to Moses, that's talking to the Jewish people, that's taking action, that's a main character, and then we shift to, in the story of Purim, a story where God's not mentioned at all? Is that about the way God's visibility has changed in the world, or is it strictly metaphorical? What's going on there?
Right. The Purim story is referred to as Megillat Esther, the scroll of Esther. The word Megillah is associated with the Hebrew word Gilui, which means revelation. The name Esther is associated with the Hebrew word Hester, which means hiddenness. And therefore, actually, Megillat Esther also communicates the revelation of hiddenness. What's being revealed is the hidden omnipresence of God. And where is that hidden omnipresence of God? You have this evil man named Haman, who's making choices to destroy the Jewish people, and there is no intervention whatsoever. It's not like the Passover story where God gets involved and starts throwing miracles at Pharaoh to subdue him. No, there is no obvious intervention of God at all. And that's because he's so almighty and so inclusive that he can let Haman choose to do whatever he wants, because no matter what he chooses to do is going to serve God's plan, serve God's purpose. And ultimately, Haman saves the Jewish people from assimilation and launches them into a new period of Jewish history towards the rebuilding of the temple. And he did that even though he didn't want to do that. And yet, and that's the irony, as the revelation of the hidden presence of God everywhere, always, even when men and women are making choices against God, God's purpose will be served, and his purpose and his plan will be fulfilled.
So that's beautiful. I love that, and that hits me nicely. I think I'll add to that question, though. Is there, like, does God's strategy change? I guess like a metaphor that I've heard before that sits nicely with me is that God is like a parent. That in the beginning, the early books of Torah, God is changing our diaper and helping us walking, doing every little detail for us. And then there's a certain point where, we're getting older and God's holding our hand. And there's a certain point where God is like the bubby or the Zadie, and it's a little bit like, God's watching over us, but it's our job to kind of carry it forward. And like we take more and more control of our actions over history, and God a little bit pulls back the reins. Do you have a sense that, like, why not have a Megillat Esther in the book of Shemot, and why not have Shemot in the time of Esther? Is this idea that God in time is shifting God's relationship with humanity? Again, noting that God is both inside of humanity and outside of humanity.
Excellent. Rav Kook, one of the great rabbis, the first chief rabbi of Israel, he said that when Moses asks God, "What is your name?" he says, "I will be as I will be." Rav Kook explains that to me, that I will be in every generation as I will be in that generation. In other words, how I will manifest and reveal myself will be different in every generation, because it has to do with, as you mentioned, it's like the growing up of mankind. As children, then the best version of God is that there's someone somewhere in heaven looking down upon you. And that's what we can handle, and that is important as we develop. But as we develop and get older and more sophisticated and capable of more abstract thinking, then the truth of God is going to be revealed in a manner that is appropriate to where we're at spiritually and the capacity of understanding that we're at. The giving of Torah at Sinai was an overwhelming revelation of God, whereby how much free choice did we really have? When God's omnipresence is so obvious, then of course you're going to say yay to God's will. But that's not the highest manifestation of the purpose of the world. The purpose of the world is to actively choose to do the will of God, to choose to do good. And if God's presence is overwhelmingly obvious, then I don't have any choices. And therefore, it says that in Purim, the Jewish people accepted the Torah on a level that was higher than they did at the time of Sinai, because now they chose it, because they could have easily said this was all a big coincidence and there is no God. But they actually opened their hearts and said, my gosh, this is really amazing. What just happened is this man was allowed to make every move he desired, and yet every move he made actually undermined himself and promoted the future of the Jewish people. And so the Jewish people embraced Judaism from a place of choice. And so what's being revealed is God's hiddenness. God intentionally hides himself from us so that we're not overwhelmed by his presence, and that we can choose to do good from a place of choice.
Got it. So now let's go to, that's very interesting, and it goes back to your question. Let's talk about choice for a second, because you mentioned kind of before that God's existence is in us whether we like it or not. And I think that, one narrative is, wow, I really want to get on the God train and try to help reveal God's presence in the world. And we have this moment where Mordechai says to Esther, whether or not you step forward, the Jews might be saved from another place here, but we're going to be fine. So, maybe the converse way of thinking about that is kind of like, yes, maybe I do have free will, but even if I have free will, like, does it matter if I choose God or not? Because God's not going anywhere with or without me. So why should I care?
It doesn't matter to history. It matters to you. See, that is actually the amazing thing that Mordechai says to Esther. He says, Esther, maybe this is why you've been positioned to be the queen, so you can go in and advocate for the Jewish people. But just know that if you don't do it, that salvation will come from somewhere else. Now, that's a very bad argument, and it's really not Jewish because there's zero guilt in it. Like guilt the lady into making the choice. Tell her, if you don't do it, this is doomsday. This is our last chance. You could save the Jewish people. If you don't, the Jewish people are over. He doesn't say that because it's not true. He was basically saying, listen, salvation will come from somewhere else, but this is about you. You have an opportunity to choose to be the conduit of God's plan and purpose into the world. You don't want to step up to that plate. You don't want to be to receive that incredible gift and possibility of being in service of God. Okay, you lose out. The Jewish people won't lose out. And that's the amazing thing. The choices that we make is not going to change history, but is going to change us. And there's really one choice that we have, and everything else a variation of that. Either you're going to choose to serve the purpose and plan of God, which is to bring ultimate good to all of mankind, or you're going to choose to deny yourself that opportunity, to delude yourself that there is no story, there is no plan, there is no purpose. And really your choice is what you come away with. Your choice has greater influence than the outcome of the choice. Your choice defines who you are. Do I define myself as a conduit of divine purpose and plan, a vehicle for bringing greater goodness in the world and revealing the truth of God is one and we're all one with God and one with each other through God? Or am I going to deny myself that opportunity, delude myself that I'm self-contained, self-sufficient, I'm not part of a story, I contribute nothing to the world, and I'm just going to selfishly serve me? I call that misery. When a person just selfishly cares about me. But when a person says, I want to step up to the plate and live in service of the greater good and the highest good, and the highest good will be manifest no matter what, but not through you, and this is your opportunity. And that's what he said to her.
Wow. And do you think ultimately, even for those who choose that, make that choice, is what's driving that choice a sense of truth? Is it a sense of ultimately selfishness because you realize it makes you feel good to be at one with God? Like, what drives the choice to actually even serve God in that way?
That's kind of the question of love. Is love selfish, or selfless? It's beyond the either or. When you love somebody, you feel good about yourself. You feel good about giving yourself over to somebody else. So is it selfish that you feel good about giving yourself over to somebody else? There's nothing wrong with feeling good about yourself. And so what really drives us is to be us. I just want to be who I am. That's all I want to do. I want to be who I am. And what am I? I am a conduit of goodness in the world. Each and every one of us is a conduit of goodness in the world, the presence of God, the presence of goodness. And that's really the choice. Are you a servant of the good, or are you self-serving? Isn't it self-serving to serve the good? It makes me feel good to do good. That's a good self-serving. That's not a problem. There's two ways to feel good: to either look good or do good. Okay. And most people are opting for the looking good to feel good. And that doesn't work in the long term. And maybe even in the short term, it doesn't have much life to it. But to feel good is to do good. And that's ultimately what it means to serve God, to serve, to bring goodness, oneness, love, peace, truth into the world.
Beautiful. And the way to do that, going back to your metaphors from earlier, is to recognize you're a character in the film and look into your bag and see what are the tools that you have, and then you develop a plan to put those into place, either where you're sitting or what you have. That's what it is.
Exactly. Look, I'm playing a rabbi named David Aaron. I was given the ability to do public speaking. It's just a gift. Now, I actually wanted to go into acting. So that was my choice. I could have gone into acting. In my case, I'm not saying this is a criticism of actors, but I believe that if I would have chosen the path of acting, it would have been all about me. It would be all about building my name. It would be all about making money and being famous. And I realized when I was 18, 19-year-old that maybe I could use my ability for public speaking in service of building God's name and bringing good to the world. And that's really the choice that we all have. We all have been gifted with gifts, and we've all been given a problem that trains us in the empathy, because it takes one to know one and it takes one to heal one. And then essentially, that's the question. Are you serving to bring into the world a greater consciousness of that oneness of God that includes us, that permeates us, which is the very context and the very essence of what it means to make this world a good place.
So many questions, but I want to be respectful. So my one question I want to ask is, I love this idea. I relate to it deeply personally, to be frank. I think I'm just trying to play devil's advocate so there's more than one voice in the room. One of the knocks you hear on kind of what you're describing is that sometimes religion can be taken to an extreme. Suddenly people think that they're doing God's work and they're only doing good things, and that leads to, we can imagine the worst possibilities, to murder, to destruction, to attacking other people, because they're doing what God asked and they're following God.
Yeah. You're doing a good job for the devil.
Yeah.
That's a good question. When my first book came out, Endless Light, another book came out that did much better than mine. It was called God is Not Great. And it was basically a book that, as far as I understood, that recorded all the crimes in the name of God. And yes, a lot of people have done a lot of bad in the name of God. But then that's not God. That's not God. That's creating God in man's image. And that's a new kind of idol. We're projecting on God what we want. I believe that when a person has a sophisticated, mature understanding of the guiding principles and directives of Torah, then they will see that this is an instruction book for bringing greater good to the world.
Mm-hmm. Got it. So is there the checks and balance to make sure you're not going off the mark when serving God is to look to Torah? Is that the idea? And Torah will...
Yeah, look, if we decide and impose on God what we think he wants us to do, then this is just about me. I'm not getting beyond myself. I'm not serving a reality more than me. I'm projecting what I want onto God. That's really evil. It's one thing that I'm evil, but I'm creating God in the evil image that I want him to be. And I turn him into the accomplice. I turn him into the very foundation of my motivation and the justification of what I'm doing. And therefore, faith can be very, very dangerous. And I don't know. I mean, my faith is based on the revelation of Torah at Sinai, and I believe that the Torah offers us the best guide to the best life to build the best world.
Okay, and then I said that we were going to come back to today, and I'd like to come back to today for a little bit. You mentioned a little bit earlier the idea that God is different in different generations. Right? Manifestation. Sorry, yes. God manifests differently in different generations. Kind of talk me through, as deep or as focused as you want. Certainly since October 7th, we've had a lot of things have happened. For you personally, how are you thinking about God since October 7th? And I'll add to that also, you are a Rebbe, a teacher for students, both in your yeshiva, in your place of study, and across the world. And I know that you're a parent and a grandparent as well. How are you thinking about talk to me about God since October 7th?
Look, I believe that October 7th was a unbelievable manifestation of evil. And it just makes it so clear that we need to work really hard to bring good back to the world. Being a son of a survivor, I once imagined myself in the concentration camp, in the gas chamber. I wanted to imagine whether I would lose my faith in God. So I put myself into that imagination, and I was gasping for air. It was my last breath of air as I was in the gas chamber, and I lost my faith. But then suddenly I realized, but if there is no God, then Hitler's not evil. He's just not my taste. Like, I don't like chocolate ice cream, but I have I can't say that he's evil. If there is no God, then evil's just not my taste. And I knew that that's not possible. I could not accept that Hitler was not evil. And then I realized that I could never lose my faith in God, because my sense of good and evil is so hardwired into my being that it is not possible for me to say that evil is just not my taste. And so I think what we're witnessing here is hopefully people are understanding how evil is, and how much we need to bring good back to the world, love back to the world, understanding back to the world, which is functionally the presence of God.
And then, let's take it a step further. Certainly in America, I know you could speak to Israel, but certainly in America, within 2 days, it wasn't the consensus, wow, this was an evil act and the world needs to respond. It shifted very quickly to Israel's to blame, any means necessary for the Palestinians, like all these kinds of phrases where now it feels like certainly in North America and in America that there is not a sense of stopping evil, or if there's a sense of stopping evil, Israel is what's evil, the Jewish people are what's evil. Do you see that as, is this Hashem again trying to confuse us or make us harder? What's happening there?
Well, it's a longer story, but the best I can do with the time that we have, we are here to make choices. If you don't choose, how good is good if you didn't choose it? If you were, obsessively, compulsively good, would you call that goodness? You'd call that just compulsive, obsessive behavior. When you choose good, that is a manifestation of good. For good to be chosen, there's got to be a challenge there, and the greater the challenge and the greater the choice, the greater the goodness that's manifest. And so we're in a world where we have to think really hard on what we choose to believe and what we choose to do in the name of goodness. And that's the challenge of this generation. If it was obvious, it wouldn't be a choice. And if it's obvious, it wouldn't be the greatest good. The greatest good is a goodness that's born of choice, even under the conditions where it's very challenged. And so I'm not sure I'm making enough sense here, but I have a whole class on this. But did that make some sense, what I just said?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And by the way, the way you described it runs through so many things. So there's a test for the Jewish people. There's a test for those who are suddenly immersed in denouncing the Jewish people. There's probably a test for the Israeli people as well, right? I think one of the interesting phenomenons of Israel is that we're out of the Beit Midrash, right? We're imagining a world that's perfect. We're trying to run a government with an army, with human soldiers that are trying to protect our people, defeat Hamas, all those kinds of things, and trying to do it in a way, like you said, that fits in with the greater mission of God. And again, not in a holy war that's actually evil, but in a let's call it a holy war that's actually good, that we're trying to do good through war. And how hard is it to try to do good through war?
Exactly. That is the greatest challenge of genuine goodness, that sometimes genuine goodness doesn't always look so good. I mean, when I see films of Palestinian children, my heart breaks. I don't want to see that. That pains me. I am disturbed in the deepest way by that. But nonetheless, what can we do? We have to fight evil. And if Hamas is hiding behind human shields, what are we supposed to do? We do the best we can to get the civilians out of the way. And so that kind of clarifying what really is pure goodness, even though it's a very challenged goodness, that is an opportunity for really delivering the truth of what it means to bring goodness to the world. And sometimes it's not so simple. So it's really simple to say, well, you got to leave these Palestinians, you're overreacting. But overreacting, they've said that they will do it over and over again. They plan to do massacres over and over again. So, so it's just very simple to say, ceasefire. We would love a ceasefire. It's very simple. Let Hamas surrender, return the hostages. It'll be finished.
Beautiful, thank you. Okay, I'll give you the last word, which is, our audience, there's a great number of North Americans who follow us, both Jewish and non-Jewish. What's your message from Israel, from Jerusalem to Americans right now about God, about anything? What do you want to leave them with?
Well, I would like to leave them with be very, very careful and selective of what you hear and the choices you make, because everybody has good intentions, but good intentions doesn't always deliver goodness, like genuine goodness. And I think a lot of people spew out their opinions of this and that, without really doing the proper research and getting the facts. And so I encourage people to be selective in their listening, to be careful in doing full research, and that their intentions are genuinely about doing good and bringing good to the world, because the Jewish people only want to bring blessing to all of mankind, not just to ourselves. And our army is called the Israeli Defense Force. We are not on the offense. We're not looking to be on the offense. We only defend ourselves, and we only we only act in response to threat. We're not looking to threaten or hurt anybody, but what can you do when you have missiles? I mean, literally missiles on major cities of Israel. There are thousands of people that are not in their homes for 5 months already. That just is not, that's bad. That's like evil. And so, sadly, there is still evil in the world, and the force of good must fight that evil and bring good to all of mankind, not just to the Jewish people.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Aaron. It's really such a treat to have some time with you. I feel like I get a taste of being back in the old city with you again. May you be blessed. May your family be blessed. May your students be blessed. And may you continue to do the holy work that you're doing to bring God into this world.
Amen. Thank you. Blessings to all of us.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.